Hello there. Welcome to this webinar about approaching assignments critically. So in this webinar, we're going to look at a few different aspects of the process of taking hold of your assignment brief and really understanding it. And from that, moving into finding the right literature to help you have a successful outcome on your assignment. Okay, so initially, we need to think about this aspect of criticality, and it's something that comes up a lot throughout study in undergraduate and postgraduate, but often people don't think deeply enough about how it relates to your assessment. So criticality is something that grows from level 4, first year undergraduate, through to level 6, the last year of your undergraduate degree, and then on into your master's study. Okay, so we're thinking about levels 4 to 6 as being undergraduate. And as you see from the information on the screen here, you're starting off by analysing and evaluating. So analysing is the process of taking something apart, thinking about the individual aspects within it, and evaluating, thinking about things like comparing things, to what extent is something true, that sort of thing. And especially in this comparative way of working, as you're finding more and more sources, then you're able to evaluate things in a comparative way, which starts to become quite strong. As you can see, it moves to level 5 into thinking about concepts. So what are the key ideas of concepts? So they might be in your subject, key concepts that are used across all the literature, and be expected to use those with growing confidence. As you get to the end of your undergraduate, you're critically analysing. So you're looking at the analysis and using other ideas from the literature and from the subjects and these concepts to analyze. So as you break something down, you're looking for certain types of themes within that in a critical analysis. And then the complexity of the information that you're evaluating is increasing as you go through your undergraduate. So as you get to your final undergraduate, your end of your third year, perhaps the complexity is there. You're looking at concepts, ideas, and the criticality has gone through all of your work. Once you get to master's level, obviously that's still there, that complexity and that critical analysis, but now you're handling things like theories. So theories are these important sets of ideas that are the foundation of your subject. There might be theories that have been around for quite a while. So for instance, the theory of evolution, okay? But there might be newer theoretical works coming out all the time. So you can keep up with the changes and developments in theory. One mistake that's made with the idea of theory is that people think that theory is just an idea that's not been proven. And that's not true. A theory is a set of ideas that we are fairly sure, pretty certain, are right. So the theory of gravity, for instance, we're pretty sure of, yeah? And some of these other theories, like the Marxist theories, they're reliable in their application and people agree on their existence. They may not agree with what comes out of that theoretical analysis, and this is where the debate comes in. Okay, but they are things that are quite solid and quite important in your subject, in your study. Okay, so analysis and evaluation. So what are the sort of questions that we might be asking then? If we're doing critical thinking, we're going beyond the idea of repeating and describing what you found. Okay, that's going to be right from the beginning of your first degree. That's something you're moving beyond. Okay, and in doing that, you're making choices, and that's your independence of thought. So you are allowed to ask questions about anything you come across. And that's a really important, people sometimes think, oh, that's a really important textbook in my subject. I can't, question anything in that. You can question everything, but you need evidence. You're questioning with evidence. And this is where the comparative idea of critical thinking comes in. And sometimes people think that critical thinking is about just finding the problems or just finding the holes in something. Not at all. You could be critically evaluating something and then come out with thinking it's really strong and giving reasons why you think something is strong. Or even more subtly, you might think that certain types of evidence are strong in one particular way, but then you could use different evidence because it's strong in a different way. And when you're bringing these together, that's when we're thinking about synthesis. Okay, so analysis breaks things down, is asking questions, and synthesis brings things together, and you're combining evidence, and usually you're doing that to serve an argument. So you're creating your answer for an assignment, for instance, by bringing this evidence together and evaluating it and combining it. So analysis is really asking these questions of what has been done, who did it, who was asked in the interviews, when was it done? Was it a while ago? Is it pre-pandemic, for instance? Have things changed since the pandemic? So the when can be very important. How was the research done? What methods were used? Were they using methods that have been proven in other literature to be very effective, or are they using methods that aren't conventional? That might be okay, but why did they use them? Yeah, so the justification of this. And obviously, if you're looking at somebody's research, they will justify their choices by reference to previous literature as well. Okay, so this is a build-up of knowledge, isn't it? It's a creation of knowledge through research and publication. So once you've got that analysis, you're breaking this down, you're asking these questions, maybe your notes are recording some of these answers, you can then evaluate, and you're making judgments, but they're reasoned judgments. Okay, you have reasons behind your judgments. So how strong is their evidence? How can you tell how strong their evidence is? Is the argument they make, for instance, in a research paper, is the argument internally consistent? Are they relying on some concepts, and do they actually carry those through? Or are they changing their mind? Are they being inconsistent in how they do that? Are there weaknesses in the way that they construct their argument? It's fine to do that. It's fine to pick those things out. And does their evidence support their conclusions? Quite often you read papers and they're rock solid. You can see the evidence, the conclusions clearly based on the evidence, but it's not always like that. And it is perfectly legitimate for you to be going, not sure about that. Possibly we could suggest a question here. And then you can compare it with another research paper, and that might be a good part of your argument, nice critical part of your argument there as well. And can you find other types of evidence? So are there statistics or examples of maybe some interview quotes from another study that might just support a different conclusion? It's quite useful to use a critical thinking model, and this one's from the University of Plymouth. And you can see that there's a development. So you go from sort of lower to higher order thinking as you follow through that critical thinking path. So there's the basic descriptive questions to start with. What was done? When was it done? Who did it? Where was it done? Why was it done? We started thinking now about the reasons, the justifications for something. How was it done? Well, the how has a why involved, doesn't it? Because how is a methodological question. What methods did they use? Why did they use those methods? Why did they use them with those people or with that technical process? And then you can start to ask, well, what if they used some different methods? What if they'd interviewed different people? So the factual and the counterfactual are in there as well. And then you can ask questions like, so what? What's the relevance of this? To what extent are these findings important? And in what situations are these findings important? And then you can presumably, from that, start thinking about what the next piece of research that will be desirable. What more do we need to know? What's the limitation of that piece of research? And what does that, beg the question that somebody needs to research next? Okay, it's very good to have something like this and use this model to make sure you're covering all of the different aspects of critical thinking. So let's imagine that you've been given a new assignment brief. Okay, it's a bit of a dangerous moment, I think, for some students because you'll have there's always somebody who will take, oh, right, I've been lectured on this topic. I'm confident on this topic, and they'll go off and they'll start planning their assignment. And what that person will do is they'll plan, even sometimes start writing their assignment with what's in their head from their lectures. And this is a common misconception about the role of the lectures. The lectures are there to introduce you to ideas, to give you some good standard texts, to outline some of the main theories, perhaps. Okay, but the lectures in themselves are definitely not sufficient, and they're not a complete learning that you need to do for a module. The assignment is a learning experience as well as a performative handing something in, delivering something type of activity. So the first thing you need to do with an assignment brief is actually to fully bottom out your understanding of it, okay, and apply lots of critical thinking to it. Assignments are usually more sophisticated and complicated than they look when you first read them. There's depth in this because you're working at degree or postgraduate level. Okay, there's going to be depth in it. So we recommend a three-stage process, and you do these separately. You make separate notes on the topic, the actions, and the parameters. And in all of this, what you're trying to ensure is that you're applying yourself, you're thinking about one thing at a time. Okay, we're trying to avoid grabbing at things and thinking, oh, right, I understand all that. I've sort of got it in my head. You want to give yourself time to really get to the bottom of what's going on. So the first thing we'd make notes about is the topic. So what's the assignment about? What's the top level idea or topic that it's about? And does that break down into a few other things? Are there some key ideas and big ideas that are covered by that topic? Do you need to think about other things that might be implied? Some things might be explicit and mentioned in the assignment brief, but other things might be required. Well, if I'm thinking about that, then I must think about these other two issues, perhaps. So you're writing it down. Quite often in the topic section here, people will do things like mind maps. How are things linked together? What is it from my lectures? What kind of things does this remind you of? What things are linked? If I go back to that particular lecture, what other things do they mention that are connected? Just situating this assignment and the topic of the assignment within what you've been taught about in the module. Okay, you're not thinking about what you're going to write. You're definitely not thinking about what you're going to write or plan. You're just waking up all that knowledge you picked up from the lectures and thinking about how it fits in. What are they looking for? What are they wanting you to talk about in this assignment brief? Okay, that's the topic. You might have up to a page of notes on that or more, okay, or a nice big mind map. The second thing to think about is the actions, because people sometimes will have assignment brief and go, oh, great, it's one of those things, great, I know how to do that, and they won't read it properly. They won't actually, in detail, think about the assignment is asking you to do. And obviously, it's very important to hand in what's been asked for, otherwise you'll lose marks. So what type of written response are they looking for? Is it a critical biography, an essay, a report, critical review, systematic review? What kind of thing are they asking you to do? And do you know what one of those looks like? Do you need to do a little bit of research to think, I haven't done one of these before. Maybe I need to access some study skills stuff from the library, put some international advisors, maybe even book a session with an international advisor, go through. I'm not done one of these before. Not quite sure how I go about it. And that's fine to do that. But it's best to do that first, right? And not wait until you're halfway through it and it's getting all a bit mangled because you don't really know how to do it. Okay, so this is the whole point of this process. You're analyzing, you're breaking down the assignment brief before you get started. And sometimes if you read all the way down through the assignment brief, you may even have been given a template for it. Okay, so it's worth going all the way down. Sometimes the templates are kind of at the bottom, sometimes they're in the description, and it's good for you to be able to think about what it might look like, start to imagine what they want you to create. And finally is the parameters. The P of TAP is parameters. There will be limitations to the work. You know, once you've got this amazing mind map full of all these different ideas, chances are there'll be more than required on there. So you need to think, well, where are the edges? What's the scope of what I'm doing? So some things might be required, but some things might not be. Just because you're talking about a particular technology, do you need to describe the history of that technology? Or can you just mention or introduce it as it is now? Okay. Do you need to think about how it's applied? Maybe it's important to talk about how it's applied. Maybe the question does imply that, or perhaps it doesn't. There's a lot of critical thinking in here because you're thinking about what the purpose of the assignment is. What are they wanting you to think about? What are they wanting you to write about? How much are they asking you to write? So things like the word count are important at this point as well. You know, if you've only got 1,500 words, you know, hundreds of words about the history of something, it might not be relevant. So it all goes into that thinking about what the parameters are. Okay. Another thing you'll find in your assignment brief are the learning and assessment objectives. And it's important that you look at these every time you get an assignment. To start with, they might not be very familiar. You might think, oh, these are just, you know, lecturer speak. How am I supposed to use these? But gradually what you'll find is you'll start to stitch together an understanding of what your lecturers are actually teaching you and what they want you to learn. It's a really important thing because the assessment is based on the learning objectives of the module. Okay, so you need to evidence through your work against these learning objectives. So if you've got, let's say you've started planning your assignment, but then your assignment doesn't address the learning objectives for this particular assignment, it's bound to be a poor mark, isn't it? Okay, so thinking about the learning objectives, what the key ideas are within the learning objectives, and having those in mind is really, really important. And then thinking to yourself, okay, did I understand those concepts and those ideas in the lectures, or do I need to go back, rewatch some lecture videos? Do I need to go back to some of the reading just to make sure I fully understand that? Because what you're doing now is you're setting yourself up for doing that that assignment. So it's a good way of double checking that you really do understand the basic things that you need for that assignment. And then alongside the learning objectives are assessment objectives. And these are more tightly focused on what you're actually going to hand in, but are equally important. Okay, so the assessment objectives will be what structures whatever marking criteria the lecturer is using. Okay, so not paying close attention to the assessment objectives it's a little bit like driving down the road and not looking at the signs on the side of the road. You know, you need this information. So going back, thinking about your notes on the topic section at the top, and how do you think that information is going to relate to these assessment objectives? How do they're going to start to fall into a bit of a pattern for you as you look at those things. Also, you might look at the module handbook and look at the learning objectives for all, and assessment objectives for the whole of the module and see how this assignment fits into that. What bit of the module are they getting you to write about? Having that clarity is really important because what happens is your work will speak directly to what they want to assess. That's exactly what we want. And also, when you're thinking about the actions part of your tab, how do the actions that you've got written down, how do they relate to you showing that you've achieved these assessment objectives? If you've got an assessment objective and you look at your actions, think, nothing I've said so far in my actions actually would provide evidence for this assessment objective. It's time to go back and reconsider. So the T and the A and the P, the topic, the actions, the parameters, they're the three different sides. It's like a triangle around your work. And you need to make sure you kind of got those, all three of them dialed in. Now, you know, any assignment has got quite a bit of subtlety to it, but especially when you get to level 6 or level 7, you will come back to your TAP. Okay, now that's not to say you should do it later. It's something that you will keep coming back to because as you work in, as you do the reading, you'll start to see some of the relevance in this work. Okay, and it's important for you to be able to go, I understand it a little bit better now. Okay, so keep coming back to it. Now, what I've provided here is there are two examples of an assignment brief, just a title, okay, and a Google form that enables you to actually practice writing that the TAP notes, okay, just to get you just used to the idea of breaking things down. So I'll leave this on the screen for a few seconds for you if you want to just do the QR code and that'll take you through, and you can pause the video, have a go, and then carry on watching. So that's the first example. And this is the second example. So again, I'll leave this on the screen for a few seconds for you so that you can use that QR code if you like to do the practice. Okay, fantastic. So we talk a lot about evidence, critically using evidence, but we don't always think about what that evidence is and where it comes from. And once you realize this, then it starts to make a lot more sense in the way that we use evidence in our written work and in our thinking and our work at university. So basically, the evidence is all based on research. The research might be in previous academic writing, but quite often it's primary research where people have actually done some surveys. They've been doing some experiments, maybe some practical work, maybe they've interviewed people. So it's that primary research that really drives the acquisition of knowledge. Okay, so this is really about defining what knowledge is and how do we create new knowledge. Yeah. And that whole topic area is epistemology. It's how do we as human societies create knowledge? When this academic tradition, it's done through research and then writing and publishing. So data collection, analysis, and interpretation. And it's important to have all three of those things. So you collect new data, you analyze that data to see exactly what's in it, and then you interpret that. And the interpretation is supported by previous knowledge. Okay, so if you look down at my wall analogy at the bottom here, okay, Jones 2025 just published. Okay, but when they did their research, they used Patel, Sykes, Rice, Flint, Boyo. Okay, they had those in their reference list because they were going back to those because they've done similar research or written about the same topic, and they're being used as evidence in Jones 2025. And if you look back at Patel, for instance, then they might have used Flint, Jenkins, Dubois, Smith, Cohen, Rice, yeah. So a bit further back. So as the wall is built up, knowledge is built up, then people are using the more recent work to help interpret because the field has moved on. If you think about it, if you go back 10 years or 20 years in any technology, or even in culture, in films and books and things, you can see that things have moved on, things have become out of date because we understand a little bit more now than maybe we did 20 years ago. The one exception to that is sometimes there are works that come out that are what you might call seminal, really important. A really key idea is introduced, and you might be referencing something for 10, 20 years ago because it just is really key. It started a whole field, perhaps, and it's got some key concepts in it. Even so, we're careful not to give that too much respect because just being famous and important doesn't always make it right. One example there is, Einstein. People kind of, oh, wow, Einstein was amazing. He was a genius. Yes, but even Einstein got things wrong. And it's important not to be too starry-eyed in that sense that, if you disagree with something and you've got evidence, go ahead and disagree. That's absolutely fine. So for those students who might be doing a dissertation soon, then the important thing you need before you start on a topic is a research gap. So in the same way that you've got these different studies relying on each other, there might be something that's just a bit of a gap. Nobody's looked at this way. Nobody's looked at that particular issue. Now, you can't randomly pick an issue that doesn't have any literature related to it, because it's a little bit like trying to get a brick to float in midair above a wall. It's just not supported by the other work that's being done. And you don't want to duplicate, on the other side, you don't want to duplicate work that's already been done. So you need to be somewhere in the middle there, don't you? You've got something where there's a gap and a new angle you can take on it, and researching in that little space will add to the total body of knowledge. Okay, and that's what the research gap is. The research is published in peer-reviewed journals, and so there's a link there to the peer review system, and just a little video explaining how it works as well for you. Okay, so sometimes people make a mistake, and students will make a mistake thinking, oh, well, actually, I'll do my references at the end. I understand this topic. I can write loads. I can write 2,000 words or 3,000 words, it's fine. And they write out their assignment and they go looking for references at the end. Okay, please don't ever do that. The reason for it is actually that the literature is the work. If you think about it, you're here to learn from all the research that's been done and then to use that in your work. And essays where someone has sort of gone and found some literature at the end, it's painfully apparent, and your grade will always, you could be fantastically good at writing, really understand some concepts well, but that approach to literature will limit your grade. Okay. So at the beginning of the process, after we've done the TAP, the next process is actually to start exploring what literature is out there. Okay, and we're going to go into this a little bit more detail in the second half of the session today. So first of all, you explore, so you go out and you think about, what can I find? What literature, what research is being done in the last 5 years, let's say. And then within that, you collect that as much as you can, and then you go through and you select, so you long list and short list. Once you've got your selected sources, then you're analysing what's really going on in here. What is the evidence? What are the key ideas? As you're doing that, you're making notes, and the important ideas you find, you're then paraphrasing those, paraphrasing that process of writing the key ideas in your own words, your first draft paraphrasing. Okay, so you got them for later on. Once you've collected all that information, you've got your paraphrases, you've got a good rounded idea and a good evidence base of what's going on, then you can start planning. There's an important moment in that when you ask yourself, do I understand enough? Do I have enough information to plan my assignment? And if the answer is yes, then you start to plan. And you're planning down to the paragraph level. Okay, so 10 to 12 lines of writing sort of level. And with each one of those, you're looking for about 3 sources, 3 citations, references for that. So you can see that, within an assignment, you may well have, 10, 15, 20 paragraphs. So think about how much literature you're going to need to look at. Some of those references, your key studies, you will use more than once as you go through your assignment, but some references you'll use once because they reference a particular specific idea or they back up a particular point of view. Okay, so we're getting to planning when we're ready to plan. We understand enough. Once you've planned in detail down to the paragraph level, your writing will be quicker. And if you're not writing in your home language, if you're writing English and it's not your home language, then a plan that's structured and has some detail in there about how you're going to use these references is going to make it much easier for you to write. Okay, so we're working in a self-supported way. And finally, after you've written out your assignment, then you collate your Harvard reference, or if using APA, your APA reference list. But that's a process of just making sure you've got a reference list that has all of those works that you've cited in your text. Okay, so the reference list isn't an additional thing, it's a presentation of what you've used. And that's the whole point. So you've done your TAP, your TAP, you're getting a really nice, rich understanding of what your assignment is about and what you'll be asked to write about. The next thing you need to do after that is to think about what it is that you need to find out more information about. Okay, and this is just avoiding that mistake of thinking, oh, right, I've had the lectures, I know everything. Okay, and clearly that's like we talked about before, that's not. Okay, so the reading is really the second stage of your learning about a topic. You're getting a deeper knowledge of the topic. You're listening to and you're reading the words of people who've actually researched about it. You get that nice deep understanding of the detail. For instance, if you're doing reading research about sort of qualitative topics, you're hearing quotes, or you're reading quotes from people who've been interviewed. That's really strong, really powerful stuff. Okay. And you're seeing how the ideas you've been taught are supported by research that's done in the real world, but also that research isn't perfect. It's not a done deal. There might be more than one piece of research on that topic, and they don't really quite add up, and they don't really agree with each other. There's tension in it. There's critical tension between those different things, and that's what is going to come into your notes. And it's training you how academics think. It's showing you that all the different ways that you can think and research and reason when you're doing this. So you're learning a lot by doing this. So what you need to find all this is a research plan. Okay, so what you're going to do is write out a series of research questions, like a shopping list. Okay, I need to find out about this, I need to find out about this, I need to find out about this, and you write it out in a structured way. Because when you're researching on MetSearch or Google Scholar, it's enormous. Okay, the amount of information out there is huge. If you're going into that with just the name of the overall topic of your assignment, you're going to not find the things you need to find, or you'll find the things that are easy to find, or you'll find the things that happen to match the limited number of keywords that you've got to start with. So you're going to have gaps, okay? And also many of the rubrics for these assignments in the higher grades, you're actually independent research, finding new things that are not within what you've been taught is actually graded for. Yeah, so you're going to think, okay, what else do I need to know? How can I get deeper into that bit? So what you're doing is you're looking at your topic parts of your TAP notes and thinking, all these different topics, I need to find out about these topics. If they're important to my assignment and they're relevant to my assignment, I need to do some actual structured research to find out some information about them. So what does that research process look like? So first of all, you're writing out your research questions. Okay, you're looking at your TAP notes and you're breaking them down and you're asking questions, and there are specific questions. I need to find out about the statistics for I don't know, mobile phone sales over the last 20 years in Europe. They're quite specific questions, and you go out and find those sources, and you work on one research question at a time. Okay, so what you want to avoid is like just stumbling into researching and just being really unstructured, because what will happen is you get really overwhelmed and the detail will do for you in the end, and you won't be able to think of all the different things you need to find out about. Okay, and when you're presenting your work, your bibliography, your reference list needs to look complete and relevant, and this also helps you to do that. So if you think about the assignment brief and framing research questions, going back to that example we used earlier on, you can pick out keywords from the assignment brief. Yeah. So this example here, childhood immunization, the Sahel, how much information do you need about the region? Do you need socioeconomic information about the region? As you think more deeply into that and using your TAP notes as well, you can get quite a lot of, you might have 15, 20 research questions, and that's absolutely fine. That's what you really want to have. Okay, so once we've identified our research questions, we're thinking about searching for literature. And we're being very picky about what's acceptable research or academic sources. Okay, so peer-reviewed journal articles and well-referenced academic books from reputable publishers. Okay, we're trying to avoid grey literature. And grey literature is, websites, blogs, anything that's not peer-reviewed or well-referenced academic books, really. Sometimes you'll need it. Depending on your subject, you might need key documents from regulatory bodies, government bodies. That's fine, but you're going to be using those in very specific ways, and you're going to be using a small number of those. 5-10% of your reference list is going to be grey literature, realistically. Okay. I would, as much as possible, search using MetSearch, and they do have a new AI search assistant functionality in there now, which is really useful. And speaking to somebody from the library just earlier today, they told me that they've also within the different databases within MetSearch, so the specific subject-based databases, they actually have their own AI search assistants in there as well. So you could look at those with some of the keywords from your questions, from your research questions as well. Okay. Just know about Google Scholar. Google Scholar is more user-friendly than MetSearch, but actually it tends to pick up a lot more grey literature than it does academic literature. Okay. And the other thing is that the MetSearch platform is taking you through connections that are paid for, right? So we have paid as a university, we have paid for all these databases and all the literature in them. So chances are what will happen is if you're on Google Scholar, you're outside that, you find something that looks good and all you get is the abstract, and using quotes or using information just from the abstract is not acceptable. Okay, it's not going to be enough for you. But you can get around that, because if you found an article that you think, oh, it's really strong, copy and paste the full title into MetSearch and you should be able to find it. Okay, so sometimes what people do, they have a bit of a double strategy. They use Google Scholar, but they copy and paste the titles and they find it in MetSearch and they get full access to the work. And once you get to the articles, when you've decided to shortlist it, I would download it so you actually have the PDF as well, and that can be useful for all sorts of things later on as well. Okay, so do take time practicing. Think of this searching skill as a skill in itself, a separate skill. Okay, and work that up and be conscious that it's one of the skills that you are working on as a student. Okay, so what you need is not just lots of literature, but you need the right literature. Okay, and there is one approach, which is long list and short listing. Okay, you want to achieve a few different things when you're searching for literature. One of the things you need to do is find out what type of research is out there. What kind of thing is there out there that you might have access to? Now, you don't know that before you start looking. Okay, so the long list is a very exploratory way of searching. Okay, for each research question, you take each research question separately and you search for it. Think about what your keywords might be. You're using combinations of keywords. You're changing the order of your keywords. Okay, so you're not necessarily just relying on one phrase, but you're mixing it up as much as possible. And as you're doing that, what I usually do is have a Word document, and I paste in the research question, and then as I find things that might be useful, I'm just pasting the link and the title of each of the articles that I might find. And you're looking to spend quite, to find lots of things here. Okay, they need to be relevant, but you don't necessarily start with know really what kind of things are most relevant. So you are finding more than you will eventually use. Okay, so you're recording that. When you're opening up a research article, for instance, you're reading the abstract. Okay, is the abstract looking kind of right for me? Yeah, okay, it is. Right, okay. Copy and paste the article link and the article title and put it into your notes underneath your research question. And set yourself a fixed amount of time to do that. Okay, so for instance, long listing for a question might take you an hour or 2 hours, and then the short listing will be the same amount of time again. Okay, so let's imagine we're doing it fairly quickly. So for an hour, you spend an hour exploring all the different things that might be relevant, all those different possible keywords, and you might end up with, I don't know, 15 articles that you think might be useful. As you've done that, you've looked at lots and lots and lots of things. You've searched repeatedly. You've probably looked at, 50, 60, 70 different titles, and you've opened quite a few of those. So you've had a broad view, and then you'll think, well, these are things that might be useful. For the second hour, for the second block of time, you stop searching. You're just going back to those things that you've got the links for, and you're asking a very specific question. What is it about this article that's going to help me with my assignment? And bear in mind, you've done the TAP process, so you know what your topic is, you know what you need to be writing about. So, and you're still within that individual research question. So you make the relevance is really specific to that research question. Okay, and you go through. So if you look at again at the abstract for a paper, maybe have a quick look at the conclusion. Okay, you're skim reading, you're having a look at it, thinking this seems to be quite good actually, and then as you go into it, you might find some information that is going to be really useful. Then what you do using this method is underneath the link to the article and the title, you write out a sentence or two saying what it is that's important about this research paper for your assignment. Okay, if you can't write that sentence properly, delete the link. Right? The whole point is to boil down. You're reducing your list from the long list to short list. The short list is useful literature. So you might go from 15 sources down to 5, 3, 2. That's perfectly fine. If you think about it, if you have 15 research questions and you have 2 sources for each of those research questions, well, you've got 30 pieces of really relevant literature for your assignment. That's pretty good. Okay, so this is a method really of finding out as much as possible what's out there and then filtering out the things that are most important to you. So this is the shortlisting method here. Okay, so you're only going back. And one thing, please, to avoid, and it's really important that you avoid this, okay, is that you're not reading the whole article. That's really important that you're not reading the whole article. You're just doing that very, very critical, if you like, going in, skimming, just finding out what's in there and what might be useful for you. Okay, we haven't started the note-making process yet. This is just literature selection. And do, think about the link between your research method, the way you're finding this literature, and your time management. Because one of the things that can really, really balloon out is unstructured research. And you're still, how do I know when I found enough things? Yeah, questions like that, I've been researching for like over a week now. I'm not sure I've covered everything. If you take a structured approach, thinking about your research questions, make sure your research questions cover everything that you've identified on your TAP, and then you've done a long list and short list on each one of those, then you are likely to have a really good, solid set of literature from which to work. Okay, and there's the long list there. So it's a slightly wrong order for some reason, but there's the structure for the long and short listing. Okay. So it's worth also just thinking about these journal articles. If your previous education hasn't actually been based on journal articles, okay, then you will need to have a little bit of a learning curve about how these journal articles work. They usually have a standard set of contents. Okay, they start with an abstract, which is 200 to 300 words, which is a summary of the research aims, the methods they used, and the results and conclusions that they've made from that research. Okay, after that, you're into the main body of the article itself. Okay, and they'll give an introduction. Sometimes that has lots of background about the theories and the previous work that they're basing this on. The methods will say what methods they used, why they used them. Then you'll have a results section and then a discussion of those results separately. Qualitative articles, maybe if they've been interviewing people, for instance, they will combine the results and the discussion together. So that's one difference you might see, and they might call these sections something slightly different as well. A good article will tell you the limitations, which is great for critical thinking and critical writing. And finally, the conclusions. What do they feel they've learned? What do they think needs to be researched next? So when you're having a quick look at an article, the abstract is the place to start. Then the conclusions to see what actually they feel they found. And then you can go back and dip into some of these other things. Sometimes it's interesting to see what methods they used. Okay. But please, 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 you shouldn't be, finding an article, reading the whole article. and then finding them on, and you've looked at 3 articles, and you've spent a whole day. That's not what we're after. We're selecting first, making sure that these things are really relevant to us before we do that in-depth reading. And we have another seminar available where Dr. Gay goes through the techniques for reading, and it's a lot in there for reading strategies. Okay, so just to kind of touch on them quite quickly. Very rarely you can read a whole research paper. Sometimes you might get an assignment where it's based on that research paper. Clearly you're going to read the whole thing. Okay, but there's so much detail and so much in one of these very, very densely written things that if you just read the whole thing and that's the way that you're doing your research, you're going to be overwhelmed. Just, information overload is what's going to happen, and you won't be able to retain that sense of critical engagement with things. Okay, so you think about scanning for individual words. You can even do Control F on a computer to find keywords and just read that paragraph that keyword comes up. You can read quickly over something and skim. What's the general idea? What's the sort of gist of what this is about? And sometimes, you can just look at the headings. This looks interesting. I'm quite interested in some of these headings, especially in reports. That's a really good way of doing it as well. Okay, but you've got, when you're researching, stick with your research question. It's a really important thing, because what happens is that you get interested in one thing and you see something else, and before you know it, you've gone down a rabbit hole. Now, that's just your interest being taken by something, especially if you're tired. But actually, remember, you've got a plan, because your research plan, your research questions are based on your assignment brief. So you're sticking to that to make sure that you're getting what you need from that. Okay, so do pick up that webinar from Dr. Gate about reading strategies. So why are we being so critical? As we're going through, if you think about everything I've said in this webinar, it's all about you thinking independently and making choices. Okay, so critical thinking is important for lots of different reasons. You're being assessed on it, so for no other reason, you're going to get a high grade, but also you're developing academic and professional knowledge. Not that something's good, something's bad. It's more subtle than that, isn't it? As you learn, as you're going to grow into the subject, it's an intellectual skill, but critical thinking. Employers want that; they need it desperately. Okay, and if you're going to make a proposal for a new product or a new way of doing things, you can justify it. You can see the relative strengths of different bits of evidence when planning for something. In interviews, when you're being interviewed for a professional job or graduate entry, it's a real differentiator. You can talk in a critical way, in a subtle way about using evidence. Amazing. And also you can apply critical thinking to every part of your life. It's a really important personal skill as well. It's an intellectual toolkit for you to use for the rest of your life. It's one of the most important things people take away from university. So do look at the library's critical thinking pages as a follow-on from this introductory webinar. So that's it for this one today. We have these following webinars coming up: academic reading, referencing, structuring assignments, building arguments, effective analysis, powerful paragraphs, and using AI effectively. So this is giving you a quick run through, an initial go, introducing some of these key ideas within academic practice. You'll also see information about this being posted on Instagram as well. Do access on Moodle. Okay, all the recordings of these webinars will be on there, so you can watch them asynchronously. As information on the workflow handbook, some information it goes into this sort of level of detail, a bit more about the whole of the study process. And you also see how you can access maybe our daily drop-ins in the library, and also some information about booking one-to-one sessions if you want to go do something in detail with us. So thank you very much for watching this far, and please do access the services from the academic advisors. It'd be great to see you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.